My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I was 28 years old when I learned that some people will take everything from you and still expect gratitude when you survive. I had been in a medically induced coma for 6 weeks after a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light on a Tuesday afternoon in downtown Austin. I was on my way back from a client meeting. I remember the light was green. I remember looking at my phone to check the address for my next appointment. I remember the sound of metal crushing metal. Then I remember nothing for 42 days. My skull was fractured. My spine was damaged in 3 places. My left lung collapsed. The doctors told my family I might not wake up. And if I did wake up, I might not remember who I was. I might not walk. I might not be the same person. But I woke up, and I remembered everything. What I didn't remember was signing over my business. I had spent 4 years building a small tech consulting firm in Austin, Texas. Just me at first, working out of a spare bedroom in my condo. Then I hired my first employee, then 3 more. Then we moved into a real office space in South Congress. Within 4 years, we had 23 employees and annual revenue of $2.3 million. We specialized in cybersecurity for medical practices, small clinics that couldn't afford the big firms, but desperately needed HIPAA compliance and data protection. I knew that space because I'd worked at a large cybersecurity company for 5 years before starting my own. I'd seen how the industry ignored small practices because the contracts weren't big enough. So I built a company that served them. We charged fair rates, we did excellent work, we built a reputation. By the time I was 28, I owned a profitable business, a paid-off condo in Travis Heights, and a savings account with 6 months of operating expenses. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, independent, proud of what I'd built. Then a stranger decided to drive drunk on a Tuesday afternoon, and my family decided to destroy everything I'd worked for. When I woke up in that hospital bed, my mother was sitting beside me, crying, holding my hand, like she hadn't held it since I was a child, telling me how scared she'd been, how grateful she was that I survived, how the whole family had been praying, how they'd taken shifts at the hospital so I was never alone. I believed her. For 3 days, I believed every word. My throat hurt from the breathing tube. My head felt like it was full of cotton. The medication made everything soft and distant. But I was alive. And my mother was there. And I thought that meant I was safe. Then my business partner, David, called. He wasn't supposed to have my number. I'd left strict instructions with the hospital that only family could contact me during recovery. No business calls, no stress, just healing. But David found a way. He called the hospital switchboard and lied. He said he was my cousin. The nurse connected him. When I answered, he said 4 words that changed everything. Sarah, what did you do? I didn't understand. My brain was still foggy. Everything felt like it was happening underwater. I asked him what he meant. His voice cracked. He said, "The business. You sold it. Why didn't you tell me?" I told him I didn't sell anything. I'd been in a coma. I didn't even know what day it was. There was a long silence. Then David said, "Your brother came to the office 2 weeks after your accident. He had a lawyer with him. He had paperwork. He said he had power of attorney. He said you'd authorized him to make decisions on your behalf while you were incapacitated." My chest felt tight. I asked what kind of decisions. David's voice got quieter. "He sold the business, Sarah. All of it. The client contracts, the software we developed, the intellectual property, everything." I asked how much. $340,000. I closed my eyes. The room spun. Our business was valued at $1.8 million. I knew because I'd had it appraised 6 months earlier when a competitor had approached me about a merger. $340,000 for a company worth almost $2 million. David said he tried to fight it. He said he called my parents. He said he contacted a lawyer. But the power of attorney was legal. The documents were filed correctly. And the buyer's lawyer said if David interfered, he could be sued for tortious interference with a contract. He said, I'm sorry, Sarah. I thought you knew. I thought this was your decision. I hung up and I stared at the ceiling and I tried to make my brain work through the medication and the confusion and the pain. My mother came back into the room an hour later with coffee from the cafeteria, with magazines she thought I'd like, with that same concerned, loving face. I asked her about the business. Her expression didn't change, not even a flicker. She smiled gently and said, "Honey, you've been through so much. Let's not worry about work right now. You need to focus on getting better," I asked her again. "Did they sell my company?" She sighed, like I was being difficult, like I was a child asking too many questions about adult matters. Then she said, "We did what we had to do. You were dying, Sarah. The doctors said you might never wake up. We had medical bills. We had to make decisions." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I asked if I signed anything. She said no. But my brother had power of attorney, and the doctors said there was a significant chance I'd never recover cognitive function. So they made the choice to liquidate assets and focus on my immediate care. I asked where the money went. She said it went to the hospital, to rehabilitation costs, to keeping the family afloat while everyone took time off work to be with me. She said I didn't understand how expensive it had been to keep vigil for 6 weeks. I asked for documentation, for hospital bills, for receipts. She said I was being ungrateful. She said she couldn't believe that after everything they'd done, I was accusing them of something dishonest. She said the head injury must have affected my personality because the daughter she raised would never question her family like this. Then she left. And she didn't come back for 2 days. For the next 2 weeks, I recovered in that hospital room. And I started making quiet phone calls to David, to my accountant, to the lawyer who had handled my business formation 3 years earlier, to the bank where my business accounts were held. Piece by piece, I learned the truth. The business had been sold for $340,000 to a competitor who'd been trying to buy me out for years. My brother had taken a $60,000 consulting fee for handling the transaction. My parents had taken $80,000 for caretaker expenses, even though I had full health insurance through my business, and the hospital bills were almost entirely covered. The remaining $200,000 had gone into a family trust account, controlled by my father, designated for my long-term care needs. None of it had gone to my medical care, not $1. My insurance had covered everything except a $5,000 deductible, which I'd already paid from my personal savings before the accident. When I confronted my father over the phone, his voice was calm, patient, like he was explaining something simple to someone simple. He said it was complicated. He said I didn't understand financial planning. He said the trust was for my long-term benefit because no one knew if I'd be able to work again. He said they were protecting me. I asked to see the trust documents. He said I wasn't well enough to handle legal paperwork yet. He said my cognitive function was still impaired. He said we'd discuss it when I was fully recovered. That's when I knew. That's when I understood with absolute clarity. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting themselves from me. I was released from the hospital 6 weeks later, still weak, still in physical therapy 3 times a week, still processing what had happened to my body and my life. I couldn't go home because I didn't have a home anymore. They'd sold my condo too. My mother said it was too big for someone in my condition. My father said the equity would help with recovery costs. My brother said I should be grateful they were handling everything while I healed so I could focus on getting better. The condo I'd bought with my own money, that I'd paid off early by working 60-hour weeks for 3 years. That had been my first real proof that I'd made it. Gone. Sold for $420,000, below market value again, to a buyer my brother found. The money went into the same trust account I wasn't allowed to see. I was 28 years old, and I owned nothing. I moved into a small rental apartment in South Austin, 1 bedroom, barely furnished with things Nora helped me buy from thrift stores. Nora Bennett had been my office manager. She was one of the few people from my old life who'd stayed in touch. She brought me groceries. She drove me to physical therapy. She sat with me while I cried angry tears that I couldn't have afforded to cry if I'd been alone. The first lawyer I consulted said it would be hard to fight. Power of attorney is legal. If the documents were filed correctly, my family had the right to make financial decisions on my behalf while I was incapacitated. Courts are reluctant to second-guess family members who step in during medical emergencies. He said I could try to prove they'd acted in bad faith, but it would be expensive, and I'd be going up against my own family. Was I sure I wanted to do that? I said yes. The second lawyer asked better questions. His name was Marcus Webb. He was in his 50s with gray hair and reading glasses he kept on a chain. He listened to my whole story without interrupting once. Then he asked, "Did you ever sign a power of attorney document before the accident?" I said no. I'd never even thought about it. I was 28 and healthy. Why would I need one? He asked if the document had been notarized. I said I didn't know. He asked for copies of everything: the power of attorney, the business sale agreement, the condo sale documents, the trust paperwork. I got them from the county records office. It took 2 weeks and cost me $83 in fees I could barely afford. But I got them. Marcus looked at the power of attorney for a long time. Then he pulled out a magnifying glass and looked closer. Then he made a phone call. He said, "This was filed 3 days after your accident. Most families wait at least a week or two to see if the patient stabilizes before making major financial decisions. Did your brother have access to your personal documents before the accident?" I said no. I'd kept everything important in a fireproof safe in my condo. Only I had the combination. It was a 6-digit code that I'd never written down or shared with anyone. Marcus asked if the safe was still there when they sold the condo. I didn't know. I'd never gone back. I couldn't bear to see it empty. I called my mother and asked what happened to my belongings from the condo. She said they were in storage, in my parents' garage. I could come get them whenever I wanted. I went the next day, with Nora, because I didn't trust myself to go alone. My parents' house looked exactly the same as it always had. Big colonial in Westlake Hills, perfectly landscaped yard, 2 expensive cars in the driveway. They'd lived there for 15 years, and my mother treated it like a showpiece. She answered the door with a tight smile. "Sarah, you should have called first. I would have had everything organized for you." I said, "I just wanted to see my safe." She led me to the garage. My belongings were stacked in the corner. Boxes, bags, furniture I recognized from my condo. And the safe, opened, empty. I stared at it, at the digital keypad that should have been locked, at the door hanging open like a mouth. I asked my mother how they got into it. She didn't even blink. "Your brother figured out the combination." A 6-digit combination to a digital safe with 10,000 possible combinations that I'd never shared with anyone, that I'd set to a random number specifically because I didn't want it to be something obvious. I asked how he figured it out. She said he'd tried a few codes and got lucky. I looked at Nora. Nora looked at me. We both knew that was impossible. Marcus said that was very interesting when I told him later. He said we should probably look into how that safe got open. Because if they'd broken into it, that changed things. We started building a case. Marcus said it would take time. He said we needed to prove either that the power of attorney was fraudulent or that my family had grossly mismanaged my assets for their own benefit. It took 18 months. 18 months of depositions and document requests and family members who suddenly couldn't remember basic facts. My brother said he'd acted in good faith. He said he'd been advised by a lawyer that selling the business was the best option. He said the $60,000 consulting fee was standard for handling a complex transaction. My parents said they'd been protecting my interests. They said they'd spent thousands of their own money caring for me. They said I was being vindictive and ungrateful after they'd sacrificed everything to keep me alive. Their lawyer was expensive. He wore suits that cost more than my rent. He painted me as mentally unstable from the head injury. He said I was confused about timelines and events. He said my family had acted heroically during a tragedy, and now I was punishing them for it. But we had evidence. We had the business sale documents showing it sold for less than half its appraised value. We had emails from the buyer admitting he'd known it was a distressed sale and had gotten a deal. We had bank records showing exactly where the money went. None to the hospital. None to my care. We had the condo sale records showing another below-market transaction. And we had testimony from the notary who'd notarized the power of attorney. Her name was Linda Vasquez. She worked at a UPS store in Round Rock. She remembered my brother because he'd seemed rushed and nervous. She'd asked if the person granting power of attorney was present, and he'd said no. She was in the hospital in a coma. She said that was unusual, but not illegal if the documents were in order. Except the documents weren't in order. My signature on the power of attorney was forged. Marcus hired a handwriting expert, a woman who'd testified in federal fraud cases. She compared my real signature from business contracts and checks to the signature on the power of attorney. She said they weren't even close. The forged signature was traced from another document. Someone had put my real signature under a light box or held it up to a window and copied it carefully onto the power of attorney. My brother, my parents. Someone in my family had forged my signature to steal my business while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. The case went to trial. It took 5 days. 5 days of sitting in a courtroom while my family's lawyer tried to paint me as a liar and a manipulator. 5 days of listening to my mother cry on the witness stand while she talked about how much she loved me and how she couldn't understand why I was doing this. 5 days of watching my father sit stern-faced and self-righteous while he explained that he'd only done what any responsible parent would do. The jury didn't believe them. They deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict. Fraud, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of assets. The judgment was $1.4 million. The value of the business, plus lost income, plus punitive damages. My mother gasped. My father went pale. My brother put his head in his hands. I sat perfectly still and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just a cold, quiet certainty that the truth had finally been spoken out loud in a room where it couldn't be denied. My family appealed. Of course they did. Their lawyer said the judgment was excessive. He said they'd made mistakes, but had acted in good faith. He said I was destroying the family over money. The appeals court upheld the judgment, every dollar. When the final ruling came down, I didn't celebrate. I sat in my apartment and looked at the court documents and thought about the person I used to be, the person who trusted her family, the person who thought blood meant loyalty, the person who woke up from a coma and believed her mother's tears were real. That person was gone, and I wasn't sure if I missed her or not. For 5 years, I didn't hear from them. Not a word, not a birthday message, not a Christmas card, nothing. They paid the judgment in installments through wage garnishments and asset seizures. My father's retirement account was emptied. They sold the Westlake house and moved to a small rental in Pflugerville. My mother got a job at a grocery store. My father took contract work because no one would hire him full-time after the fraud conviction. My brother moved to Denver and changed his phone number. I rebuilt my life, slowly, carefully. I started a new consulting firm, smaller this time, just me and 2 employees. I worked from a co-working space instead of leasing an office. I kept my overhead low and my documentation meticulous. I didn't trust easily anymore, but I learned to trust the right people. Nora became my business partner. She'd lost her job when my old company was sold and dismantled. Together we built something new, something better. Within 3 years, we had 15 employees and annual revenue of $3.2 million. More than I'd had before. I bought a new condo, not as big as my old one, but it was mine, and only I had the keys. 5 years after the judgment, my phone rang at 2 a.m. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was my brother, crying, begging. He said mom had cancer, stage 4, pancreatic cancer. The doctors said she had maybe 6 months, maybe less. He said the treatment was expensive, the insurance wasn't covering everything, clinical trials cost money, experimental treatments cost money. They needed help. He said I was the only one who could save her. I sat up in bed, wide awake now. I asked him where his $60,000 consulting fee went, the one he took for selling my business while I was unconscious in a hospital bed with a fractured skull. He said that was 5 years ago. He said I needed to let it go. He said mom was dying. He said family was supposed to forgive. I asked him if he'd ever apologized, directly, in his own words, for forging my signature, for stealing my business, for selling my home, for leaving me with nothing while I relearned how to walk. He said he was sorry I felt hurt, not sorry for what he did. Sorry I felt hurt, like my pain was a feeling I'd chosen instead of a consequence of his actions. I told him I'd think about it. Then I hung up. He called back 6 times. I didn't answer. 3 days later, my father called. His voice was hard, angry, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. He said I was being cruel. He said my mother was dying and I was playing games. He said whatever happened in the past was in the past, and I owed it to her to help now. I asked him if he remembered selling my condo. He said that was different. I asked him how. He said they'd needed the money. They'd been in financial trouble. They'd made a hard choice during a hard time. I said, and now you need money again, but I'm the one who has it. Isn't that interesting? He started yelling, calling me ungrateful, calling me heartless, calling me a stranger who didn't deserve the name Mitchell. I hung up. My mother called a week later. Her voice was weak, thin, like she was speaking from very far away. She said she understood I was angry. She said she knew they'd made mistakes. She said she just wanted to hear my voice before she died. She said she wanted to know I didn't hate her. I almost broke. Almost. Then I remembered waking up in that hospital room, confused, scared, trusting. And I remembered her face when I asked about the business. That calm, cold face that said I was being difficult. That said I should focus on healing instead of asking questions. I told her I'd pay for her funeral after she died, not before. I said I'd make sure she had a dignified burial. I'd pay for a nice casket, a nice service, flowers, whatever the family wanted, but I wouldn't pay for treatment. I wouldn't pay for experimental drugs. I wouldn't give them $1 while she was alive. She started crying. She said I'd become a monster. She said the accident had changed me into someone she didn't recognize. I said, no, the accident just showed me who you always were. Then I blocked the number. Nora asked me if I was sure. She asked if I'd regret it. I said I'd already lived through the worst regret of my life. Trusting people who were supposed to protect me. I wasn't going to repeat that mistake. My mother died 4 months later. I kept my promise. I paid for the funeral. I didn't attend. But I paid. It was a nice service. I heard about it from a cousin who still talked to me. She said my father gave a eulogy about family and forgiveness, and how my mother had always loved her children unconditionally. She said my brother cried through the whole thing. She said they'd asked about me, where I was, why I wasn't there. She said she told them the truth, that I was alive and successful and done being used. My father sent me a message afterward, through my cousin because I'd blocked his number too. He said I'd regret this. He said I'd destroyed the family. He said I was alone now and I'd always be alone because no one could love someone so cold. I didn't respond because he was wrong. I wasn't alone. I had friends. Real friends who'd shown up when I had nothing. I had a business partner who trusted me. I had employees who respected me. I had a life I'd built from nothing after my family tried to erase everything. And I didn't regret a single boundary I'd set. Some people will steal from you and call it love. They'll destroy you and call it sacrifice. They'll take everything and call you selfish for wanting it back. My family taught me that. And the best revenge wasn't anger. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't even the lawsuit and the judgment and watching them lose their house. The best revenge was becoming successful enough that they needed me, and strong enough to say no. If someone ever uses the word family to justify stealing your work, your money, your peace, or your future, remember this: family is a choice, not an obligation. And some people lose the right to call you family the moment they treat you like property instead of a person. I'm 35 now. My business is thriving. I own my home. I have people in my life who see me clearly and love me anyway. And I sleep better than I ever did before. Because I'm not carrying anyone else's shame anymore. They made their choices. I made mine. And I'd make the same choice again. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Would you have helped them when they called? Or would you have held your boundary? Let me know in the comments because I want to know how far this kind of betrayal reaches and whether you think family deserves forgiveness just because they're family. Like and subscribe if you want more stories about standing up for yourself even when everyone says you're wrong. Because sometimes the hardest thing to do is refuse to save people who never saved you.